was 34, the year my life split open like an old wooden beam. The kind that looks solid, until one day it cracks straight down the center. I didn't know it then. But everything I believed about loyalty, about family, about what I owed and what I deserved, was about to be tested in ways I could never have prepared for. I was a woman who tried to keep peace, who filled silence with apologies and held my breath in the shadows, just to keep the people I loved from falling apart. At least, that's who I had been. Before the truth. Before the fire. Before the house. I grew up in a small town, tucked against a river that never stopped moving. Even in winter. My mother used to say the water was a reminder that nothing stayed still for long. I didn't really understand that idea until much later, when change came crashing through my life, like a storm-swollen tide. But back then, the river was just a backdrop. And my world was my parents' house. A simple white home with peeling blue shutters and a porch swing that cried softly every time someone sat down. I was the middle daughter. The quiet one. The one who stayed when everyone else left. At 34. I was still living only 20 minutes away from my parents. Close enough to stop by after work to fix the loose cabinet hinge or bring soup when my father caught a cold. I didn't think of myself as someone with a tragic story. I thought of myself as dutiful, steady, a woman who stayed because staying mattered. And then my mother died. It happened suddenly, a heart that simply stopped mid-afternoon while she was folding laundry. I remember the phone ringing, my father's voice sounding like gravel scraped across stone. I remember driving so fast my hands slipped on the wheel. I remember kneeling beside her, touching her cheek long after I knew she couldn't feel it. Grief is strange like that. It makes you bargain with moments, clinging to the idea that maybe warmth means something other than what it does. I spent the weeks after her funeral moving through days like a ghost. My father tried to be strong, but the weight of loneliness sat on him like a heavy coat he couldn't shrug off. Without my mother, the house felt hollow, and he seemed smaller inside it. I visited more often, cooking, cleaning, making sure he ate something more than toast. I didn't mind. It was the only way I knew to keep myself from falling apart. But slowly, I began noticing things that didn't sit right. Bills stacked on the kitchen counter, some unopened, some overdue. Envelopes with his handwriting shaky and unfamiliar. A notice about insurance that made no sense. When I asked him about it, he would look confused, like someone had replaced his thoughts with fog. I told myself it was the grief, that losing a partner after decades together could fracture a person's mind for a while. I told myself things would settle, but the sinking feeling in my gut grew heavier every time I found a document he swore he had never seen. Every time his eyes darted away as if trying to remember something he was sure he should know. Then one afternoon, I walked into the living room and found my father staring at a paper in his hands. His face pale, his breath shallow. "Did you sign this?" I asked. He blinked at me, confused. "Sign what?" The paper was a loan agreement. A large one. Too large. His signature looped at the bottom in a way that looked like his but wrong in the smallest ways. A chill crawled up my spine. Something was wrong deeply. Frighteningly wrong, and I could feel it moving in the walls around us. I spent the next few days combing through drawers and boxes my mother had once organized with her meticulous hands. I don't know what I hoped to find. Clarity. Maybe. Proof that my father had simply been overwhelmed and signed things he didn't remember. But what I found instead was worse. Bank statements showing withdrawals my father swore he didn't make. A letter from the county about property tax delinquency. A notice from the mortgage lender about missed payments. My parents' house, the one my mother loved. The one my father now lived in like a fragile shell, was slipping toward foreclosure. When I asked my father directly, he looked terrified. Like a child caught in something bigger than himself. "I don't know," he whispered. "I don't remember any of this." That's when the truth began to unravel. My older brother, the golden child, the one who had moved out years ago and rarely visited unless he needed something, had been helping Dad with bills. He told everyone he stepped up after Mom died. Said it with this air of noble sacrifice. But every time I called with questions, he dodged me. Said he was busy. Said Dad must be confused. Said I didn't need to worry. Except I did worry, and the worry grew teeth. A week later, while searching through the last drawer in my mother's bedside table, the one with her old perfume bottles and dried rose petals pressed inside yellowed envelopes, I found her letter. My hands shook so badly I nearly tore the paper. Her handwriting was shaky, as if she'd written it near the end. But the message was clear enough to slice me open. If something happens to me, check the house documents. Don't let your brother take advantage of your father. He has been trying to convince him to transfer ownership. Be careful. He is not the boy he used to be. The room tilted. The walls seemed to bend inward. My mother, my gentle, quiet mother had known something. She'd seen what I hadn't. And she'd written it down because she knew someone had to protect my father. Even if she wasn't there. My brother was trying to take the house. And if the documents I'd found were any indication, he'd already started. I felt the betrayal settle into my bones like winter. My own brother. My mother's son. Someone who should have been grieving with us. Not using our grief as cover. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. But instead I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the letter, feeling the weight of responsibility shift entirely onto my shoulders. I had to protect my father, and I had to protect the house because it wasn't just wood and walls. It was my mother's laughter. My childhood memories. The place where her voice still seemed to echo in the quiet and someone I loved was trying to steal it. I didn't yet know how deep his betrayal ran. I didn't yet know how many lies had already been told, or what he had forged, or what deals he had set in motion behind my father's back. I didn't yet know how close we were to losing everything. But I was about to learn, and what I uncovered would tear the last threads of our family apart. The next morning felt heavier than the air itself, as if the house could sense what I had discovered and was holding its breath along with me. I sat at my father's kitchen table, the same table where my mother used to shell peas and hum old songs, and I spread out everything I'd found, like pieces of a broken map, papers that contradicted each other, signatures that felt like imitations wearing my father's handwriting like a cheap costume, account statements drained in ways my father couldn't explain, and my mother's letter, the one piece of truth cutting through all the noise. I kept looking at her handwriting, those slightly crooked loops she always made when she was tired, and I felt anger rising so tightly in my throat it almost tasted like metal. My own brother. Her warning echoed like a whisper in the room. Be careful. She must have known something was coming. Maybe she saw a darkness in him. The rest of us were too blind or too trusting to see. Maybe grief loosened whatever mask he used to wear. I heard my father shuffle into the kitchen. He looked even smaller in the morning light. Like grief had carved out whole pieces of him overnight. His eyes landed on the documents, and he frowned as if they were strangers walking into his home uninvited. Did I do something wrong?" he asked, lowering himself carefully into the chair across from me. His voice trembled at the edges. That hurt more than anything. He was a man who used to lift me with one arm, who patched roofs and chopped wood and argued with contractors like he was made of iron. And now he looked afraid of his own signature. I reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. "No, Dad, you didn't do anything wrong, but I think someone else did." His face tightened, confusion clouding his features. "Your brother." His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried a kind of fear I hadn't heard from him before. I didn't want to say yes. I didn't want to admit the truth that had been dripping into my mind like cold water. But the evidence was right in front of us, glittering with betrayal. "I think so," I said softly. We sat there in silence for a long moment. Outside, a crow cawed from the fence, sharp and jarring, as if the world was mocking the quiet pain sitting in the room. "I trusted him," my father murmured finally, rubbing his forehead as if trying to massage his memory back into place. "He said he'd help me, said he'd take care of things after your mother." His voice broke, thin as paper. I wished I could bring my mother back just to let her tell him he hadn't failed, that he wasn't weak, that he hadn't chosen the wrong son to trust. But life doesn't give us those revisions. Instead, I gathered the papers and said quietly, "I'll find out everything. Dad, I promise. I'm going to fix this." He nodded, but his expression remained haunted, like he was mentally wandering through all the corners of his memory to find where the truth had slipped away. After making him breakfast and setting him up in the living room with the TV humming softly in the background, I grabbed my coat and headed outside. The air was crisp, biting at my skin enough to keep me awake and focused. My brother had answers he'd probably never planned to share with me. I drove to his house, rehearsing what I'd say, but knowing it wouldn't go the way I envisioned. Conversations with him never did. He always had this practiced charm, this way of speaking like every word he gave you was a favor. I used to admire that. Now it made me feel sick. When he opened the door, he looked annoyed, like my presence had interrupted something important, though the unmade couch and empty beer bottle near his TV suggested otherwise. "Why are you here?" he asked, crossing his arms. I didn't waste time. I found Mom's letter. He froze, just for a second, but that second was enough. A flicker of panic, a tightening around his jaw, then it was gone, replaced by a scoff. So she warned me about you." He rolled his eyes and tried to lean casually against the doorframe, but I could see the tension in the way he gripped the wood. "You're reading too much into things. Like you always do. That woman worried about everything." "She worried about you," I said sharply, "and she was right." He stiffened. "Watch yourself." "No," I said, my voice rising despite my best effort to keep calm. "You watch me, because I'm not going to let you take Dad's house, or his money, or anything else you forged his name on." He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a dangerous softness. "You think Dad remembers anything right now? You think he'd even know what he signed or didn't sign?" My stomach twisted. The cruelty in his tone wasn't an accident. He knew exactly what he was doing. He'd taken advantage of Dad's grief, his confusion, his loneliness, all while pretending he was helping. "You're disgusting," I whispered. His lips curled. "I'm practical. Someone had to handle things. Dad trusts me more than you. He always has." "That's a lie," I said, but my voice wavered. He smirked. "Then why do you think he asked me to take care of his finances after Mom died?" "Because you told him he needed help?" I snapped. "Because you preyed on him when he was vulnerable." He shrugged, as if the details didn't matter. "Look, whatever you think you found, it's too late. Some things are already in motion. Just stay out of it." "Not a chance." He leaned forward, eyes cold. "You want the truth. The house is practically gone, and Dad signed everything of sound mind. So don't waste your breath trying to undo it." My fingers tingled with anger. "I don't believe you." He gave me a slow smile, the kind that made me want to slap it off his face. "Then go ahead. Try to prove it." I turned and walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. My hands were shaking by the time I reached my car. Anger, fear, betrayal so sharp it felt like splinters in my skin. But beneath all of that was something else. Determination. If my brother thought he could intimidate me into backing down, he didn't know me at all. I wasn't the same quiet girl who avoided confrontation. I wasn't the daughter who stayed silent to keep peace. I wasn't the woman who let people take advantage because it was easier than fighting. My father needed me. My mother trusted me. And I wasn't going to fail them. Not even if I had to unravel every lie my brother had spun. Not even if the truth tore the last pieces of our family apart. I drove straight to the county clerk's office. If something had already been filed, transfers, deeds, liens, I needed to see it. I needed to know exactly what we were up against. and when the clerk pulled up the record and turned the screen toward me, my heart slammed against my ribs, so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Because there it was. My father's signature. On a deed transfer. Giving my brother full ownership of the house. Dated 2 weeks after my mother died. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring at the edges. My legs felt hollow. My breath stuttered. It wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just manipulation. It was theft. Cold, calculated theft. And it wasn't the end of what he'd done. Not even close. I couldn't move at first. The screen in front of me seemed to flicker even though I knew it wasn't. My eyes burned. And for a moment, I thought it was the overhead lights. But then I realized it was something deeper. Like my entire chest had tightened around a truth too sharp to hold. The clerk, a woman with soft brown hair and tired eyes, looked at me with a kind of quiet sympathy I wasn't prepared for. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. I swallowed hard. The lump in my throat felt like gravel. "Can you print me a copy?" She nodded and tapped a few keys. As the printer whirred to life, the room seemed to stretch and tilt around me. I could hear my pulse. Steady but heavy. Like distant footsteps coming down a long hallway. When she handed me the papers, I saw it clearly. My father's name. His shaky signature. The notary stamp. My brother's smug, confident handwriting in the witness section. A clean transfer of ownership. Everything neat. Everything official. Everything wrong. I walked out of the clerk's office in a kind of slow-motion haze. The papers clutched against my chest like a wounded animal I needed to protect. The sunlight outside was too bright. Almost violent. It made the edges of the world feel unreal, as if grief itself had changed the air. By the time I reached my car, I was shaking so badly I had to sit there for a minute, gripping the steering wheel until the leather dug into my palms. My breath felt thin and tight, like I was inhaling through a straw. Betrayal is strange like that. It steals not just trust but oxygen. My brother had taken the house. Not someday. Not in theory. Not through whispered plans or quiet suggestions. He had already done it, and he had done it when Dad was drowning in grief. Just weeks after losing the woman he'd loved for nearly 40 years. I felt a sudden rush of heat behind my eyes. Not tears yet. Something hotter. Rage. The kind that fills you slowly. Rising like water in a locked room. I thought of my mother's letter. Her shaky warning. Her last attempt to protect us. She had known. She had tried. And still he had taken everything. I wiped my face and forced myself to breathe deeply. Letting the air reach all the way down. I needed to stay clear. I needed to be smart. Anger alone wouldn't save the house. And it wouldn't save my father. I drove back home, rehearsing every possible step in my mind. Call an attorney. Gather evidence. Pull together every document my mother saved. Protect Dad first. Fight second. I told myself I was ready. But I wasn't. When I stepped into the house, I found my father sitting in his recliner, staring at an untouched cup of tea I had left him earlier. He looked up at me with tired eyes, the kind that told me he had been battling a storm inside his head all morning. "Where did you go?" he asked softly. I sat down beside him, the papers trembling in my hands. I needed to check something. His eyebrows knitted together in concern. "Did you find what you were looking for?" He hesitated. I wanted to protect him, to spare him, but lies had already dug their roots into our family. I couldn't add another. "Dad," I said gently, "did you sign anything about the house?" He blinked, confusion crossing his face like a cloud moving across the sun. "The house. You're still the owner," I said carefully, "but I found a deed, and it shows that you transferred it to my brother." His face drained of color. "Transferred? I didn't. I would never give him the house. I would never do that without talking to you." "I know," I whispered. He shook his head. gripping the arms of his chair. "No, that's not right. I didn't do that. I don't remember signing anything like that. Why would I do that?" His voice cracked. I showed him the papers. He stared at them like they were written in a foreign language. His hands trembled as he touched the edges of the signature. "That's not me," he whispered. "It looks like me, but it's not. I didn't sign this." My chest tightened. "Dad, we're going to figure this out. I promise." He looked up at me with eyes that suddenly made him seem 10 years older. "Your mother always said he was drifting, getting colder. I didn't want to believe it. I thought he was just stressed." I took his hand. "This isn't your fault." He nodded slowly, though I could tell the words didn't land. Guilt had already wound itself around him like a vine. We spent the next hour going through old files my mother had saved in her bedroom closet. I didn't expect to find anything miraculous, but I needed to understand the full extent of what we were facing. My father watched me silently, sometimes closing his eyes as if listening to some memory only he could hear. And then, near the bottom of the box, I found something. Not a legal document, not a signature. A voice recorder. One of those small digital ones my mother used when she wanted to remember grocery lists or jot down ideas for house projects. I clicked the play button out of instinct. Static. A soft breath. Then my mother's voice. I froze. "Testing. Okay. If something ever happens to me, and if you're hearing this, then you need to know something. Your brother has been trying to convince your father to transfer the house. He's been talking to a man about refinancing behind our backs. I don't know how far it's gone. But I found papers in his car." Static again. I didn't confront him yet. I thought maybe I was imagining things. But something feels wrong. If I'm gone, please protect your father. He won't see the danger. He loves too blindly. And your brother, he's not the little boy you used to play with on the porch. Not anymore. The recording clicked off. My heart felt like it had dropped straight through my body. My father looked at me with broken eyes. "She knew," he whispered. I nodded. She did. And I didn't listen. "Dad," I said firmly, "this isn't your fault. Mom tried to warn us both, but she didn't tell you because she didn't want to hurt you." He looked down, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. I failed her. I wrapped my arms around him, resting my head on his shoulder. "No, he deceived you. He took advantage. You didn't fail anyone." He didn't respond, but he didn't pull away either. We sat like that for what felt like a long time. Long enough for the house to settle around us. Long enough for the weight of the truth to anchor itself in the air. I knew what we had to do now. I made appointments. I gathered documents. I organized everything my mother had left behind. I contacted an attorney specializing in elder fraud and property disputes. My father watched me quietly, sometimes reaching out to hold my hand when the silence grew too heavy. But even with all the preparation, even with all the evidence, nothing could have prepared me for what came next. Because when I confronted my brother again armed with my mother's letter, her recording, the forged deed, and the attorney's findings, he didn't back down. It escalated. He pushed harder. He cornered my father. And he made a move that none of us saw coming. A move that would turn betrayal into full destruction. A move that would cost us far more than the house. The night everything turned came dressed in silence. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just a strange, heavy quiet that settled around the house like a warning. I felt it the moment I stepped inside after meeting with the attorney. The air carried a stillness that didn't belong there. Like a breath being held behind a closed door. My father was asleep in his recliner, the TV murmuring softly in the background. I turned it off and tucked a blanket around him, trying to ignore the uneasy pull in my stomach. Maybe it was just exhaustion. Maybe it was the weight of everything we'd uncovered, the forged deed. My mother's voice recording. The attorney's concern when he saw the documents. He told me calmly, professionally, that this wasn't just manipulation. This was potentially criminal. He said Dad had rights. He said we could challenge it. He said my brother could face consequences. But he also warned me that people rarely give up stolen things quietly. I told myself that was all it was: anxiety. Nerves. The mind inventing alarms where none existed. I was wrong. The first sign came when I walked toward the kitchen and noticed the back door unlocked. My father was obsessive about locking doors, even when he forgot where he placed the keys. I locked it quickly, but a chill ran down my spine. The second sign was the faint smell in the air. Something sharp, something chemical, something out of place in my childhood home that always smelled like lemon cleaner and old books. I checked every window, every latch, every room. Nothing. Just silence. Just shadows. Just the feeling of being watched by the walls that remembered too much. I sat beside my father and stayed with him until he stirred awake. His breathing was unsteady, and when he saw me, his eyes widened in worry. "You were gone for a long time," he said softly. "I had to meet with the attorney," I replied. He hesitated. "Did he say we have a chance?" I nodded. "Yes, a very good one." He let out a shaky breath. "Your mother would have been glad you're handling this." His voice cracked on the last word, and I looked away so he wouldn't see how deeply that carved into me. We talked for a while. Then I helped him to bed, waited until he fell asleep, and settled into my old bedroom with a stack of documents sprawled across the covers. I planned to work late into the night, searching for anything else my mother might have hidden, but exhaustion pulled at me, heavy and relentless. My eyes drifted shut. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a noise, a soft, low creak from the back of the house. Me pulls jumped. I sat up straight. All sleep gone in an instant. Another noise. This one, a muffled thud. My breath hitched. Someone was in the house. I moved quietly, stepping into the hallway. The floorboard groaned under my weight, and I froze. I listened. Another sound from the kitchen. I knew that sound. A drawer. Being opened. My heart hammered as I moved closer. Each step slow and steady. I reached the doorway and peered inside. Barely breathing. There, standing in the middle of the kitchen with his back toward me, was my brother, rifling through drawers, looking for something. I didn't know whether to scream or run or tell myself I was still half asleep, but I wasn't dreaming. His silhouette was unmistakable. His posture, his hurried movements, his muttered curses. I stepped into the doorway. "What are you doing?" He jerked, whipping around so fast papers fluttered from his hands. His eyes were wild, not angry, not annoyed like before. "But frantic. You shouldn't be here," he hissed. "I live here," I shot back, despite the tremble in my voice. "You broke in." He glared, jaw tight. I was checking on Dad. In the middle of the night, by going through the kitchen drawers. He took on a step toward me. I took one back. "Give me the letter," he demanded. My chest tightened. "What letter?" "Oh, don't play stupid," he snapped. "Mom's letter. The one you found. The one that's filling Dad's head with lies. Give it to me." I shook my head. "No." "You think this is a game?" he growled, lowering his voice. "You think any of this matters? The house is mine. Dad signed it over. Nothing you do can change that." He didn't understand what he was signing. I said, "You exploited him." His lips curled. "You can't prove that." "Yes, I can," I said. "Mom recorded everything." For the first time, true fear flashed across his face. "What recording?" he demanded, stepping closer. You know exactly what I'm talking about. His face twisted. Give it to me. Now. No. He lunged. I stumbled backward, hitting the kitchen island. Before he could grab me, my father's voice cut through the room like a crack of thunder. Stop. My brother froze mid-step. My father stood in the hallway, trembling, but furious. His hand braced against the wall for balance. I'd never seen him so angry, not even when we were children making mistakes he tried to teach us through. I trusted you, Dad said, his voice shaking, and you stole from me. My brother swallowed hard. Dad, she's confusing you. She is protecting me. Dad snapped. Your mother tried to protect me too, and you used her death to deceive me. My brother's eyes flicked between us. For a moment, something like guilt crossed his face, but it faded quickly, replaced by something cold and hard. You don't understand, he muttered. I needed that house. For what I demanded. What could possibly justify stealing from your own father? He stared at me, jaw clenched. You wouldn't understand. Try me. He laughed bitterly. You, with your perfect little life and your self-righteous speeches. You always had them wrapped around your finger. You think I didn't see that. You think I didn't notice how they trusted you more, loved you more. My breath caught. That's not true. Isn't it? His eyes gleamed. You got the attention, the praise, the closeness. I got expectations, pressure, questions. Nothing was ever enough for them. So why should they get anything from me? His words hit like a blunt force. That house isn't yours. I said, and Mom tried to stop you because she knew what you were doing. He shook his head violently, as if trying to shake away the weight of her memory. It doesn't matter anymore. I'm taking it, and you can't stop me. Then he moved. Not toward me. Toward Dad. I reacted without thinking. I rushed between them, shoving my brother back with both hands. He stumbled, knocking into the kitchen table hard enough to send a chair toppling. He stared at me, stunned. You need to leave, I said, my voice steady despite the fear storming inside me. And if you come back here again without permission, I will call the police. He looked at me with pure hatred, dark, simmering, dangerous. This isn't over, he whispered. Then he walked out, slamming the door behind him so fiercely the windows rattled. But I didn't know how right he was, because 2 days later, the fire happened. It started in the back room, my mother's old sewing room, the room where she kept unfinished quilts and baskets of yarn and handwritten notes on scraps of fabric, the room that held the last pieces of her warmth. I wasn't there when it started. My father was napping in his recliner, and when he woke to the smell of smoke, he panicked, called my name even though I wasn't there, tried to reach the fire extinguisher but couldn't remember where he put it. The flames spread fast, too fast. The fire inspector would later say, by the time I pulled up to the house, sirens wailing, lights flashing, neighbors gaping. The sky above the backyard glowed orange. Smoke curled into the air like dark hands clawing upward. The fire department dragged my father outside, coughing and disoriented. Hearing his voice calling out for my mother, even though she'd been gone for months, tore something inside me. And there, standing across the street in the shadows, watching, was my brother. Expression unreadable. Hands in his pockets. Not helping. Not calling out. Just watching. Watching our childhood home burn. Watching the last place my mother touched turn into ash. Watching everything he couldn't steal be destroyed. My knees buckled, and I had to grip the hood of my car to stay upright. He met my eyes from across the street, and I knew. He hadn't just taken the house. He was willing to let it burn, willing to erase it, willing to erase my mother, willing to erase everything that didn't belong to him. I opened my mouth to scream at him, to call the police, to tell the firefighters, to do something, but when I blinked, he was gone. Vanished. Just smoke and sirens and flames in his place. And the horrible, undeniable truth. He would rather destroy the house than let us save it. But the fire was only the beginning. The truth about what he had really done behind our backs, behind the law, behind the walls of our home was far worse. And uncovering it would come with a cost I wasn't yet ready to face. The fire danced in my nightmares for weeks afterward, even when I was awake. The memory of it clung to me, the smell of smoke tangled in my hair, the way the flames licked up the curtains as if hungry for every trace of my mother's life. I kept replaying the image of my father being led out of the house, coughing and shaking, his eyes searching the air for someone he knew wasn't there anymore. And worse, I kept seeing my brother across the street, still, silent, watching. That part burned just as fiercely as the fire itself. The house wasn't completely destroyed, but the damage was enough to make it unlivable. The back room, the one my mother had filled with her quilts, her spools of thread, her quiet humming was reduced to ash and char. The fire inspector said it started near an outlet, likely an electrical fault, but something in his tone didn't sit right with me. Like he was choosing the safest explanation rather than the truest one. I couldn't blame him. He didn't know the truth about our family. He didn't know my brother had been in the house 2 nights earlier, desperate enough to search through drawers like a man looking for something worth destroying the world over. I stayed with my father in a small rental nearby, a place that smelled faintly of mildew and old floorboards. He tried to be strong, but his hands shook repeatedly, especially when he looked at the clothes salvaged from the fire, my mother's sweater, shriveled by heat, her favorite quilt now stained with smoke. He handled each item like he was touching fragile bones. One evening, I found him sitting at the table holding the edge of a scorched pillowcase, staring at a pattern of tiny burned flowers. "She sewed these," he whispered, "every stitch." I sat beside him. "I know. I heard her," he said suddenly, voice cracking. "When the fire started, I thought I heard her calling me." My heart clenched. "You were frightened. You were half asleep. It's normal." He shook his head slowly. "No." It felt real. He wasn't just mourning the house. He was mourning the last pieces of her. I had to do something. Not later. Not eventually. Now. I spent the next few days gathering everything we still had: documents, recordings, insurance papers, legal files, and took them to the attorney. He examined the fire report, the deed transfer, my mother's letter, the voice recording, and the timing of everything. With each new detail, his expression grew darker. "This isn't just a family dispute anymore," he finally said. "This is a pattern, a very disturbing one." "Do you think my brother set the fire?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately. He folded his hands, leaned back, and chose his words carefully. "I think it's possible the fire wasn't an accident, and I think your brother might have known something was going to happen." A cold chill ran through me. "But proving arson can be complicated," he continued, "especially when the fire department has already labeled it electrical." I swallowed hard. "So what do? We start with the deed. That's the cornerstone. If we can prove your father lacked capacity or that coercion or fraud occurred, we can void it. Everything else builds from there." "And my brother?" "That," he said softly, "will depend on what we uncover." I left the attorney's office with a stack of paperwork and a spine full of determination. For weeks, I gathered statements, requested medical evaluations, pulled bank records, tracked down notarization logs, and pieced together a timeline that somehow made my stomach twist every time I looked at it. But the breaking point The knife that sliced through the last thread holding the illusion of family together came when my brother stormed into the rental house unannounced. It was a quiet afternoon. My father was resting. I was sorting through a box of fire-damaged documents when the door suddenly slammed open. "What did you do?" he barked. He looked disheveled, eyes bloodshot, hair unwashed. Something wild simmering beneath the surface. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, rising slowly. "But you need to leave. Dad is resting." He laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. "Don't pretend you're innocent. You think, I don't know, you've been digging into everything, that you're trying to undo what I've built." Built, my voice snapped. "You didn't build anything. You stole it." He stepped closer, fury radiating off him like heat from a stove. "You think you're better than me. You always have. That's why you're doing this." "I'm doing this because you took advantage of Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "And because Mom warned us about you." His jaw twitched. She didn't understand. She understood enough to leave a letter, and a recording. His eyes widened slightly. "You don't know what you're talking about. She said she found documents in your car. She said she saw what you were planning." He froze. The silence that followed felt thick, sticky, poisonous. Then he spoke. Low and dangerous. "You should have stayed out of it. Dad trusted you," I whispered, "and you burned that to the ground, just like the house." His expression flickered anger, guilt, denial. Something darker before he shoved past me and pounded on the bedroom door where Dad was resting. He rushed after him. "Stop." But he pushed it open anyway. Dad sat up in bed, startled. "What's happening?" My brother pointed at him, eyes blazing. "You're letting her poison your mind. You're letting her take everything from me." Dad looked terrified. "Son, please." "What did she tell you?" my brother demanded, stepping closer. "What lies is she feeding you?" "She's not lying," Dad whispered. "She's trying to help." That was it. Something inside my brother snapped. "You don't get to choose her over me," he screamed. He raised his arm, whether to grab, strike, or simply intimidate. I'll never know, but I threw myself between them and shoved him back with all the strength I had. "Get out," I shouted. "Get out or I'm calling the police." He stared at me, chest heaving, rage draining slowly into something hollow and eerie. "This is all your fault," he said quietly. "None of this would have happened if you had just left it alone." Then he stepped back and smiled. A thin, chilling smile that made my skin crawl. "You have no idea what you've started." He left without another word. But I knew deep down, in the place where instinct roars louder than logic, that he was planning something. Something worse than the deed. Worse than the fire. Worse than all the lies. And I was right. Because 2 days later, I received a call from the police. A call that changed everything. A call that made my heart stop mid-beat. A call that revealed what my brother had done behind our backs. What he had been doing for months. What he had forged. What he had stolen. And what he had planned next for my father. When the phone rang, I was sitting on the edge of my father's bed, helping him button his shirt for the day. His fingers weren't as steady as they used to be. And lately even simple tasks left him exhausted. The ringtone startled both of us. Sharp and jarring in the quiet room. I answered with a tired, automatic hello, expecting maybe the attorney, maybe the insurance adjuster, maybe a neighbor checking in about the fire. But instead, a man's voice, calm, clipped, official, filtered through the speaker. "Is this the daughter of Mr. Fiveland, Harold Keaton?" My breath stilled. "Yes, this is his daughter. This is Officer Larson from the county sheriff's office. We have some information we need to discuss with you regarding a financial concern. My stomach dropped. Cold and immediate. What kind of concern? He hesitated, and the pause sliced deeper than any words he could have spoken. We received a call this morning from a representative at Riverbank Financial. They reported suspicious activity linked to your father's name. I stood up slowly, gripping the dresser to steady myself. Suspicious. How? Multiple loan applications, he said, submitted over the past several months. All large amounts. All denied. And all signed under your father's identity. My throat closed. Loan applications. Months. Denied. Signed under Dad's name. I knew instantly who had done it. The way you know a storm is coming long before you hear thunder. A sinking certainty pulled taut inside my chest. My father didn't sign anything, I said, voice trembling. He didn't apply for any loans. That's what we suspected, the officer replied. After the bank reviewed handwriting discrepancies, they chose to report it. Dad blinked at me, frightened. What's wrong? I couldn't answer yet. Ma'am, Officer Larson continued. We also need to inform you that one of the applications listed your father's house as collateral. My knees weakened. Collateral. He tried to use the house, our house, as leverage for loans. Loans that never existed. Loans he planned to get approved with forged papers. Loans he was denied. Loans he was desperate enough to burn a house over. I forced myself to breathe. I understand. What do you need from us? We'd like you and your father to come in to give statements, and we'll need copies of any documents you've collected that might support a fraud investigation. Fraud investigation. The words buzzed in my ear like a swarm of bees. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was criminal. This was deliberate. This was months of planning, months of forging, months of stealing. He swallowed hard. We'll come today. When I hung up, I realized my father was gripping my wrist with surprising strength. Tell me, he whispered. So I did. Piece by piece. Gently as I could. I explained that someone had been applying for loans in his name, that the bank flagged it, that the police were now involved. My father's hands began to shake. But why? Who would do something like that? I held his gaze. And it happened. A moment of comprehension broke across his face like a crack of lightning. For just an instant, clarity returned sharp. Painful. Undeniable. His voice fell to a hoarse whisper. My son. I nodded, and tears filled his eyes as he sagged back onto the bed. My boy. My own boy. I knelt in front of him. Dad, this wasn't your fault. He manipulated you. He deceived you. And we're going to fix this. But he shook his head, staring at the floor. No. He didn't deceive me. His voice trembled. He betrayed me. That distinction mattered, and it broke him in a way I had never seen. I helped him dress, fixed him a small breakfast he barely touched, and drove us to the sheriff's office. The building smelled like old carpet and stale coffee. But the officer who greeted us was kind, speaking slowly and gently as he guided Dad through his statement. It took nearly 2 hours. 2 hours of reliving the confusion. 2 hours of answering questions. 2 hours of shame settling into the lines of my father's face. I stayed beside him the whole time, holding his hand under the table whenever his voice faltered. When he finished, he looked drained, like someone had taken whatever light he had left and dimmed it. The officer led me to a separate room. I handed over copies of the deed transfer, my mother's letter, the voice recording, the fire report, bank statements, the timeline I'd made, emails I'd exchanged with the attorney, everything. Officer Larson scanned through the documents, his eyes narrowing slightly. This is more extensive than the bank reported, he said. There may be multiple crimes here. Fraud, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, forgery, possibly arson, though proving that will be difficult. My breath stilled. But possible. He met my gaze. If new evidence emerges. I nodded, though my heart was pounding so loudly I could feel it in my teeth. As Dad and I stepped out into the parking lot, my phone buzzed. A message. From an unknown number. But I knew exactly who it was, even before I unlocked it. Unknown. You shouldn't have done that. My hand tightened around the phone. Another message followed. Unknown. You think you can win this? You can't. Then a third. Unknown if Dad goes down. That's on you. Remember that. I swallowed a shaky breath. He wasn't just threatening me. He was threatening my father. I blocked the number immediately. But blocking didn't erase the cold ripple that ran through me. He was watching us. Waiting. Planning. We drove home quietly. Dad stared out the window, as if searching for pieces of a world he once understood. I wanted to tell him everything would be okay. I wanted to promise it with the certainty of someone who believed in justice. But I couldn't lie to him. Not anymore. That evening, as I was organizing our documents, the attorney called. I received the sheriff's preliminary notes. He said, "There's enough evidence to proceed with legal action, but you need to be prepared." For what I asked, gripping the phone tighter. For your brother to fight back? Hard. He already is. The attorney sighed. Then brace yourself. People who commit this kind of fraud almost never stop willingly. He's cornered now. Cornered people can be dangerous. I knew that already. I'd seen it in his eyes. But I wasn't prepared for what he did next. Not at all. Because the next morning, when I opened the mailbox, I found an envelope addressed to my father. A formal letter. From Adult Protective Services. A report had been filed. Against me. Accusing me of financial exploitation. Claiming I had coerced my father. Claiming I had manipulated him. Claiming I had isolated him from his loving son. And at the bottom, underlined in bold, filed by my brother's name. I sank onto the porch steps, letter trembling in my hands. He wasn't just trying to steal the house. He wasn't just trying to escape consequences. He was trying to destroy me. My reputation. My credibility. And if this report was taken seriously, if it stuck, I could lose everything. My father. My rights. My ability to fight for him. My mother's last wish. He was trying to erase me, just like he had erased her. I read the letter again. Slower this time. The words twisting sickeningly across the page. And with every line, every sentence, every lie, something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. Not ever. But the path forward wasn't straight. It wasn't simple. And it wasn't safe. Because exposing the truth meant uncovering things none of us were ready to see. Things my mother never had the chance to say out loud. Things my brother had hidden deeper than forged signatures and burned rooms. Things that would finally reveal the real reason he was so desperate. The real reason he wanted the house. The real reason he needed the money. And the real reason he would do anything, absolutely anything, to stop me. The letter trembled in my hands. But the rage that rose inside me wasn't wild or explosive. It moved slowly. Deliberately. Like lava carving its path down a mountain. I sat on the porch steps. The morning light spilling across the paper that accused me of exploiting my own father. A report filed by my brother. A report filled with lies sharp enough to wound everything I'd been fighting for. I read it again. Slower this time. Each sentence felt like a slap across the cheek. He claimed I had manipulated Dad. Isolated him. Taken control of his finances. and turned him against his own son. The phrasing was polished, almost rehearsed, as if he'd studied the language of victimhood long enough to mimic it perfectly. My father stepped outside, leaning on the doorframe. "What's that?" he asked. He hesitated, then held the letter toward him. His eyes scanned the page. By the time he reached the signature line, something inside him seemed to collapse. His shoulders fell, and he pressed a hand to his forehead. "He reported you," he whispered. "He told the law you were abusing me." "I know. Dad." Tears welled in his eyes, and his voice broke. "I'm so sorry. This is my fault. All of it is my fault." I knelt beside him, gripping his trembling hands. "No, this is his choice, not yours, and we're going to fight it." He nodded, but I could feel how deeply the betrayal cut him. Losing the house had been one wound. The fire, another. But this, his son trying to paint his daughter as an abuser, this pierced something more fragile than pride. It pierced his heart. I called the attorney, and he asked to see the letter immediately. I drove over with it tucked inside a folder, gripping the steering wheel tight enough for my knuckles to ache. When I arrived and handed him the letter, he scanned it carefully. "This is retaliation," he said, confirming what I already knew. Classic tactic. If he's worried about the fraud case or a potential criminal charge, he's trying to discredit you first. Will the report hold weight? It depends. APS has to investigate every claim, even false ones. They'll interview your father. They'll check for inconsistencies. What if Dad gets confused? What if he forgets something? What if... The attorney raised a calm hand. "We'll prepare him. And you. Don't panic yet." But panic was already curling inside my ribs, tightening like a fist. I wasn't afraid of consequences for myself. I knew who I was, and I knew what I'd done. I was afraid of what the stress would do to my father. I'd seen confusion tug at him on bad days, pulling him into a fog he couldn't climb out of. If he faltered during questioning, APS could make assumptions that would tear our lives apart. When I got home, I found him sitting in the living room holding my mother's voice recorder. The house felt colder, dimmer, like something had shifted while I was gone. He looked up at me with eyes still red from crying. "I kept failing her," he said quietly, "and now I'm failing you." "No," I said, sitting beside him. "You're not failing anyone. You're the victim here. He is the one who did this." He shook his head. I raised him. I should have known. I should have seen it. I touched his arm gently. Love blinds us more than it protects us. He looked at me, pained, but it shouldn't blind a father to his own child. That night, sleep refused to touch me. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the rental's old refrigerator and the distant sounds of cars passing on the main road. My mind replayed every interaction with my brother, every smirk, every lie, every moment he had manipulated my father. The fire, the deed, the forged loan applications, and now this false accusation. What was he trying to protect? What was so important he'd destroy his family to keep it hidden? The answer came the next morning, delivered not by a letter or a phone call, but by a stranger knocking on our door. A man in his early 50s, wearing a suit that hung awkwardly on his thin frame. He introduced himself with a soft, wary smile. "My name is Samuel Price," he said. "I'm connected to a situation involving your brother." I stiffened. "What kind of situation?" He swallowed hard. "May I come in? It's sensitive." Every instinct screamed at me not to trust him, but there was something in his eyes, fear, exhaustion, regret that made me open the door wider. He stepped inside and looked around the small rental. "This is new. Our house was damaged in a fire," I said, watching his face carefully. He exhaled slowly. "I'm not surprised. The comment struck me sharply. What do you mean? He sat at the small dining table, clasping his hands like a man about to deliver terrible news. Your brother came to me 6 months ago. He was desperate. Said he needed money quickly. Said he could repay it within 3 months. He paused. He didn't. I felt a jolt of dread. How much money? Samuel hesitated. 200,000. My breath stuttered. $200,000. Yes. I lowered myself into a chair. 200,000. More than my parents' house was worth. More than any loan the bank would approve for my father. More than we could have ever imagined he needed. What was the money for? Samuel didn't answer immediately. His hands shook slightly. He said it was to cover debts he owed to some people he shouldn't have been involved with. Gambling debts. Large ones. My head spun. My brother had always been reckless. But this was something else entirely. He said his father had signed over the house. Samuel continued. And that he'd be able to repay me once he finalized a refinancing deal. But when the refinancing fell through, he stopped answering my calls. And then he glanced at me with regret. He told me your father would give the house to him anyway. My chest tightened. He lied. Samuel nodded. I see that now. But then, he told me something else. What? That his sister, his voice dropped, was trying to take control of your father's finances. That you were manipulating him. My stomach turned. He lied to you too. I know that now. He rubbed his face. Clearly ashamed. When I realized the refinancing was never going to happen, I tried contacting him again. He told me the house had burned down. My breath caught. He told you that? Yes, and he said it was just his luck, that his inheritance literally went up in flames. He was laughing when he said it. I covered my mouth, bile rising in my throat. My brother had laughed about the fire, about our home, about everything we lost. Samuel looked at me with pleading eyes. I came here because I need to know what's real. I can't find your brother. He's disappeared, and I fear he's going to drag your entire family down with him. Terror rippled through me. Disappeared. My brother wasn't just hiding. He was running. What do you think he's planning? I whispered. Samuel hesitated, then spoke so softly, my skin prickled. Your brother told me something once, something that chilled me even then. He leaned forward. He said your father didn't need the house anymore, that the house wasn't the only thing he could take. The room seemed to tilt. My voice cracked. What do you mean? Samuel swallowed. He said if your father wasn't around, no one could challenge him. The air left my lungs. Cold, heavy, suffocating. My brother wasn't just trying to erase the house. He was trying to erase our father. I was 32, the summer I came back to the house. Older by grief than by years. Hauling 2 suitcases and a silence that had learned how to live inside my chest. I didn't plan to stay. I told myself I was just coming to sort my mother's things. To make sure the utilities were paid, and the garden didn't turn illegal on us. But the first night I slept in my old room, listening to the thin walls breathe and the pipes mutter like they remembered me, I realized the house had kept my name, the way a secret keeps a shape. The next morning I found the first letter. I should tell you who I am before I tell you what I found. I'm a woman who has always been careful not to be trouble. Firstborn daughter. Good student. Quiet laugh. I left at 19 with a scholarship and a promise to visit. I became a hospice nurse in another city because I liked the truthfulness of endings. The way people stop lying to themselves when the clock is finally honest. When Mom was diagnosed and the treatment started to demand more miles than her body had left, I started driving home every other weekend. Then every weekend. Then every day. Until the weekends were just something other people had. She passed in late May with the window open, the curtains breathing for her. I washed her hair in the sink, the way she once washed mine. And when the funeral ended and the relatives evaporated into pixelated little circles on my phone, I stood in the kitchen and tried to decide if I could stand the sound of the refrigerator's hum for another night. I could, so I did. The letter was in the blue mixing bowl, the one with the chip along the rim where my father once dropped a whisk. I reached for it to make coffee, and there it was, tucked beneath a folded dish towel like something fragile kept warm. For you. If I'm gone. That's what she'd written on the envelope. Not my name, but I knew it was mine. The handwriting tilted slightly right, firm even where the pen had dragged. I sat at the table in my pajamas, the laminate cool under my arms, and I opened it with the kitchen knife that still had a smear of strawberry on it from breakfast. My brother would say I always did things the dramatic way, but I swear to you, the truth is never polite when it knocks. Do not trust your brother with the house. That was the first line. It landed like a plate pushed off the counter. I had to read it twice before the sentence stopped, looking like a trick of my eyes. Mom explained calmly, as though we were driving together, and she needed to tell me which exit to take that after Dad's first stroke. My brother had begun bringing papers for him to sign. Small things at first, a refinance to help the business, a power of attorney for just in case. She'd argued. She wrote. She'd shouted. She'd been told by both of them to stop worrying. You know how your father trusted him? She wrote. And I did know. Because Dad had trusted us into trouble before. He is your brother, and I love him. The letter continued. But love is not a reason to hand someone your house. She said she had gone to a lawyer after Dad's second stroke, that she had changed some things. I left copies. She wrote, I'm sorry for the way it will hurt. I read the letter 3 times. I put the knife back in the drawer. I made coffee because I needed something ordinary to hold on to, while my history rearranged itself on the counter. It wasn't that I didn't believe her. It was that the words pushed through layers of me I hadn't dusted in years. My brother and I grew up in a house where the front door stuck in winter, and the back gate never latched. He was the charming one with the easy grin. The boy coaches loved, and teachers forgave. I was the girl who learned to stitch the hems of her own jeans. When Dad died 2 years earlier quickly, mercifully. In the garden with his hands in the soil, my brother handled the funeral logistics while I held Mom's shoulder through the night. He said he had dealt with the paperwork. He said, Don't worry, sis. I've got it. I took him at his word. That was my mistake. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was just the way daughters are taught to distribute their weight so no one else tips over. The following week emptied itself into chores. I moved through the house in a slow circle closet. Bedroom. Linen cabinet. The bathroom drawer with old hair ties nesting like small dark halos. Memory came like drafts through the window seals. Mom's wool cardigan still smelled like the faintest ghost of her shampoo. I set aside a stack of sweaters for donation, and a smaller stack to keep, even though the sleeves swallowed my arms. In the afternoons, the neighborhood kids shrieked on their bikes, and somewhere a dog barked at a squirrel that refused to be impressed. It almost looked like life moving forward. On Thursday, my brother arrived with a smile and a manila folder. You look tired, he said. Which is to say he arrived like he always does, narrating me to myself as if he expects me to be grateful. He hugged me, breath warm against my hair, and then he stepped back and looked around the kitchen like he was already making decisions about it. We should talk, he said. I poured 2 coffees and tried to keep my hands ordinary. He laid out the papers while he talked, as if the sound of his voice could soften signatures already dried. The pitch came rehearsed. It would be better, more efficient, for him to handle things. I was emotional. This was logistical. And the house needed to be optimized, which is a word that sounds like kindness if you ignore what's missing from it. I've been talking to a realtor, he said. We have a good window. The market is cooling. The house isn't a window, I said, but softly, because something old in me still believed he'd flinch if I told the truth too loud. His smile tightened. He slid a paper toward me and tapped a line with his nail. Dad signed. He said, You see, We can avoid the whole probate circus if we act quickly. Besides, you live in the city. You won't want to get stuck worrying about the roof. There are sentences that build a bridge between who you were and who you need to become. Sometimes they come out of your mouth before you see yourself walking across. What did Mom sign? I asked. After Dad's second stroke. He froze just slightly, the way a deer pauses at the edge of a clearing when the wind changes. Then he laughed like I'd told a joke that embarrassed him on my behalf. You've been talking to her friend Carol, he said. You know how she gets. She makes everyone nervous about everything. I've been talking to Mom, I said. She left me a letter. A tiny colorless thing happened in his face. Like someone briefly turned down the saturation. He recovered quickly. Or thought he did. He flipped another page. Shrugged. I mean, she was, on meds. Not herself. Let's not make this. He spread his hands in a weird family gesture that used to work on me when I was 19, and he wanted my savings for a car repair that wasn't a car repair. I'll need to see the originals, I said. The originals are in a safe deposit box, he said, which I can access. His smile widened as if we'd reached the portion of the conversation where the audience applauds. I'll need to see the originals, I repeated. It was strange. The calm that met me when I said it. Like a warm animal stepping out of the brush to walk beside me. And I'll need to speak to Mom's lawyer. He started pacing then, as if movement could fight my sentence into a softer shape. You don't have to make this complicated, he said. And I realized what he was actually telling me was that I didn't have to make this fair. He put a hand on my shoulder. Not gentle. We're on the same team. I lifted his hand off me like you lift a damp leaf off your skin. We are, I said. When our definitions of team include me. He blinked. I think something about my voice surprised him, how it felt like mine even to my own ears. Naw, borrowed edges. That night I took the blue mixing bowl back down from the shelf and set it in the center of the table like a compass. I pulled out Mom's letter again. Traced the indentations where her pen had pressed a little harder. She had written, "Near the end I am leaving you, what I can, information. And time, I bought back by going to someone who listened. She'd named the lawyer a woman I recognized vaguely as the kind of person who remembered to send sympathy cards on the right days. I called the office the next morning, explained who I was, and I heard it in the secretary's intake of breath, a small relief. Like she'd been waiting to exhale my name. By afternoon, I was sitting in a room that smelled like paper and stored air. My fingers folded so they wouldn't drum. The lawyer, Ms. Flores, wore a navy blazer and a face that looked like it had grown resilience in good soil. She slid a folder across the desk to me and asked if I knew what I was looking for. Proof that my mother saw me, I said. And then startled at how true that answer was. She nodded as if that were the most reasonable legal objective she'd ever heard. She showed me the new will, notarized on a Tuesday when I'd been at work 40 miles away, and the trust documents that settled the house into something with its own backbone. Your brother asked your father to sign a quitclaim deed months earlier. Ms. Flores said, tapping the timeline like a metronome. Your father did sign, but your mother retained a life estate. And later, with your father's diminished capacity documented, we executed instruments that supersede his prior signatures. She said other words, too. Undue influence. Fiduciary duty. Guardianship risks. The sentences braided themselves into a bridge. Your mother was not confused when she came to me. Ms. Flores added. And then she did me the mercy of looking directly into my eyes. She was calm. She was precise. She was tired of being told she was tired. I left the office with copies. I left with instructions. I left with a feeling like a door I had been pushing against for years had actually been a pull door the whole time, just waiting for me to choose a different direction. On the porch at home, the late sun had settled into the habit of turning the maple leaves to stained glass. I sat on the top step and read Mom's letter again as if the words could keep unfolding. and they did. Grief is heavy even when it puts down other weights. I cried there. The kind of crying that's not an emergency. Just an honest river making an honest path. When I heard footsteps on the walkway, I didn't look up right away because I already knew the rhythm. My brother didn't knock. He never had. Not since we were kids, and he knew more belonged to him than to me. He came up the steps and stopped when he saw the papers on my lap. "You went to Carol's friend," he said, like it was an accusation and a punchline in one. "I went to Mom's lawyer." I said. I stood. I was almost exactly his height, which I had never noticed before. The house stood behind me, mine, in a way it hadn't been yesterday, not because of the paper, but because of the way the paper rearranged our roles. "We're going to do this properly," I said. "No more surprises. No more signatures in kitchens while someone is making soup." "You always were dramatic," he said. And there it was, that small smile he wore like legal precedent. As if the performance of my feeling excused the substance of his choices. "That's one story," I said. And I stepped back inside the house that remembered my name, so I could find the words it kept for me in drawers I hadn't opened in years. In the days that followed, my brother moved like a storm cloud over the edges of town, not close enough to confront directly, not far enough to forget. I saw his car once, parked 2 streets over with the windows fogged. But when I stepped outside to look again, it was gone. The Adult Protective Services interview was scheduled from the Teepled Gatter. The fraud investigation was underway, and yet, the silence around him felt like a taut wire stretched between us. Humming from some tension he refused to let go. My father improved in small, surprising ways once the truth was spoken out loud. As if naming what hunted us gave him back the ability to breathe. But he aged too sharply. Visibly those early afternoons when shadows gathered at the corners of the room, sometimes I'd find him staring at the armchair where Mom once sat, as if her silhouette still pressed into the fabric. "I keep wondering," he said one night, his voice barely above a breath. When he stopped being my boy, I wanted to tell him there was no single moment, that people drift in slow inches until the distance feels like a cliff. But he wasn't asking for analysis. He was asking for forgiveness. And there was a part of me that didn't know how to answer. Forgiveness implies a wound healed over. But ours was still open. Lit off. Red at the edges. He made this choice. "Dad," I told him, laying a hand on his. "Whatever comes next, that's on him. Not you." He nodded. But doubt still pressed into his features like an old bruise that refused to fade. The APS interview came the next morning. A woman named Diana arrived, clipboard in hand. Her demeanor calm but careful. She spoke gently to my father, asking about his care, his routines, his finances. He answered in slow, deliberate sentences, pausing often as if he were choosing memory from a shelf. When she asked, "Do you feel safe living with your daughter?" he didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said, voice steady. "She's the one keeping me safe." A warmth spread through me, quiet, steady, and unexpectedly tender. It didn't erase the fear or the tension or the years of imbalance between my brother and me, but it soothed something raw inside my chest. Diana turned to me. "We will be dismissing the claim," she said gently, "and we will document the retaliation concern." Retaliation. Such a small word to hold everything my brother had done. That afternoon I made tea the way Mom used to black tea. A little honey, a splash of lemon, and sat with my father in the living room. The sun slipped through the thin curtains, turning the dust in the air into soft drifting shapes, almost like tiny ghosts settling around us. "You think he'll come back?" Dad asked quietly. "Not to apologize," I said, "but yes, he'll come back when he needs something, or when he's run out of places to hide." He closed his eyes, and I knew what he was thinking, if he had anything left to give his son. But that was the thing about my brother. He wanted what others had built, not what he could build on his own. Our answer arrived sooner than expected. The doorbell rang around sunset. I opened the door without thinking, expecting a neighbor or a delivery. But there he stood, my brother leaning against the railing, hands buried deep in his pockets, expression hollow as a gutted house. "Can we talk?" he asked. The question fell between us like an object dropped into deep water, no splash, but an unmistakable sense of depth. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, shielding my father from whatever conversation this would become. "What do you want?" I asked. He rubbed a hand across his face, up close. He looked older, tired around the eyes, skin waxy under the porch light. "They're investigating me." "Yes. You did that. You did that." I corrected. I just stopped pretending not to see it. His mouth twisted. "Dad doesn't need to know everything. He already knows enough." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Look, I'm in trouble. Okay, real trouble. I owe people money I don't have. If you could just convince him to sign." "No." He blinked. "You didn't even let me finish." "I didn't have to." He exhaled sharply, frustration flaring. "You always do this. Always make things harder than they need to be." "Harder for you," I said. "Not for us." He stepped closer again, and this time the porch light caught his eyes. They were wild, not the anger I'd come to recognize, not the arrogance. This was fear. Sharp, feral fear. "They'll come after me," he whispered. "You don't understand what these people are like." "No," I said quietly. "I don't, because I don't make deals with people who destroy everything they touch." He clenched his jaw. "You're really not going to help me?" "No." For a moment, he stood there breathing hard, like someone trying not to scream. Then his shoulders sagged. His gaze dropped to the wooden planks of the porch. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," he murmured. I thought if I could fix one thing, everything else would fall into place." "And the house?" I asked. "Setting that fire, was that supposed to fix something too?" His silence told me everything. When he looked up again, something hollow had settled behind his eyes, an emptiness where remorse should have lived. "You ruined everything," he said. Not softly, not angrily, just as a statement of his own personal truth. I stepped back. "No, Mom saw you clearly. I just opened the letter." For a long moment, neither of us moved. The porch light buzzed above us like something irritated. Finally, he turned away, stepping off the porch and walking down the path toward the street. Halfway down, he stopped. Without turning around, he said, "If Dad ends up losing everything because of this, that's on you." "No," I said calmly. "If Dad loses anything, it's because you tried to take it." He left without another word. That night, I watched from the window as his car drove away and disappeared into the dark. I didn't know where he went. I didn't know who he owed money to. I didn't know if I'd ever see him again. Sometimes absence is more violent than presence. In the weeks that followed, the investigation moved quickly. Documents were filed, statements taken, petitions granted. The deed transfer was deemed fraudulent. The fire was officially labeled suspicious. The APS claim was erased from the record. My father's legal protections were strengthened, and slowly through paperwork and signatures and long conversations across polished desks, the house became ours again. Not because of the land, not because of the structure, but because truth itself had come home. My father and I sorted what remained from the fire. The quilts too smoke damaged to save, the pictures that survived in half-ruined frames, the small wooden box where Mom kept childhood drawings and broken beads from a necklace I'd destroyed at age 9. Every object felt like something rescued from a shipwreck. The house would need rebuilding, but we had time. We had clarity. We had each other. On a cold morning in early winter, I took Mom's letter outside and stood beneath the maple tree. The leaves were gone, but the branches reached up like open hands. I read her words one last time, careful. Steady. Grateful. You saw him. I whispered. And you saw me. Thank you for that. The wind rose gently, lifting the edges of my hair like a soft reassurance. I tucked the letter back into my coat, close to my heart, where she had always wanted to live. My father stepped outside, leaning on the newly repaired railing. You ready? He asked. Yes, I said. We walked the path together, not toward a past filled with lies, but toward a future rebuilt on truth. Because in the end, revenge wasn't fire. It wasn't fury. It wasn't the satisfaction of watching someone fall. Revenge was reclaiming what was ours, rebuilding what survived, living in the light my mother left behind. And I promised myself I would carry that light forward, no matter how long the shadows tried to follow us. If you're listening to this, thank you for staying with me through the hardest parts of my story. If you want more stories like this, stories about truth, about healing, about what it costs to stand your ground, please, like the video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter. And if something in my story touched you, or reminded you of your own journey, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you.